Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.
I'll start with this. I mentioned Mark Sanders now, and I listen to Tarab Cuts quite a lot. Your duo with, and Mark loves that one as well. And like, where does your story with Mark begin? I know he's like in so many ensembles you did, and how did you guys hook up actually on the scene?
I've known Mark, I guess, since the 80s.
Already?
And
okay.
yeah, purely through playing on the London scene. But actually, we didn't do very much playing together at all
I have a good feeling. Okay.
For a good 20 years, really. Our paths would cross occasionally in the occasional things. And it was actually probably, I don't know, 20 years ago. There's a record label run by John Coxon. It's called Treader Records, and he was organising a concert of reeds and percussionists. There's John Chakai and Roger Turner, Alex Ward, and no, it's Alex Ward, Roger Turner, John Chakai, Tony Marsh, and it's going to be Evan Parker and Mark. And Evan couldn't do it, so John Coxon asked me to do it, and it really clicked.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps in the earlier days, our directions were a bit too dissimilar. But, there'd been 15 years of playing separately before we met. And then somehow when it clicked, it felt great. And I pushed on with it with Mark in lots of different projects, particularly Tarab Cuts.
Yeah. You mentioned like you crossed paths in the 80s. Like, how was the scene back in the 80s? I mean, I know the UK scene quite okay. I played with so many UK musicians, and there was this huge, I don't know, Loose Tubes, kind of more African revival. And then you had kind of more this improvised scene. Like, what was the situation on the improvised scene?
It was very healthy in terms of the number of musicians around, and if you like, the quality of the musicians around was great. But it was still very much a kind of hidden music. It's I suppose there was a potential period in the 70s where that generation of players gained some attention whilst it was very much a new thing. By the 80s, we had Thatcher in power, the cultural landscape had changed, and it was quite hard to be working in something which was clearly a very non-commercial music and not attempting to be necessarily, a particularly user-friendly music.
Yeah, okay. Nicely put that. Okay.
But what was great then was it was possible to operate in a very DIY manner. You could book a room above a pub. They have these function rooms. You could book that for £10 for the night and really have quite an autonomous situation where you could put on groups, different combinations, and most musicians, or if you like, groups of musicians, circles of musicians, had their own places. So, most nights of the week, there could be an improvised music concert in one of these organised by musicians. And that was great both for reaching an audience and for musical development, and cross-fertilising with other groups of musicians. So I think a lot of us got to know each other around that time because of the ease of putting on gigs.
Yeah. How was the connection with the older generation? I mean, like, that there was like, I guess, Kenny Wheeler, Evan was there already. So much John Stevens, like everyone.
Yeah, it was different for different people. Mark was always a little bit connected to that generation and to the South Africans who were around, like Dudu Pakwana and that scene. Personally, I almost consciously decided, maybe I didn't have a choice, but not to seek to play with that generation because I was interested in trying to find something separate from them with colleagues of my own age, really, I guess. And that was another very positive thing about London back then, was that because there were a lot of musicians around, you could find a group of people who you felt sort of comfortable with, but comfortable is the wrong word, but you felt of, I guess this happens at all times, but you felt of a similar age and you had a similar desire to seek things out, to look for things. And working together without trying to take too much from, earlier scenes, I think was very healthy. And then, after a while, as you get more, I guess you get more confident in your own work and you get more experience in your own work, things broaden out naturally. And in the 90s, I started playing with John Stevens and Derek Bailey. And that generation. But again, that always felt a little bit like stepping into their world and leaving my world.
Interesting. Okay. If you look at it like that. Okay. Wow. How come?
Well, I mean, they were 10 or more years older than me with a different set of experiences, coming from different places musically. In terms of their musical history. What they bring to the music. And 10 years is a lot. It seems like a lot when you're in your 20s and your 30s. Let's put it that way. That's quite. 10 years is quite a few generations of musicians, really.
Definitely. Sure. I know what you mean.
When you're in your 60s, it doesn't seem so much. I play now with 80-year-olds. I play with 20-year-olds, and that seems natural. But probably to the 20-year-olds, I wouldn't like to ask them what they think.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. But you were actually, speaking of the 70s, I've read you were self-taught. And how did you decide to pick up the saxophone, and what was the main impetus, actually? I mean, like, to do that, or?
My entry into playing wasn't a particularly easy path, because my parents were very discouraging about pursuing it. But eventually I managed to sort of persuade them for some classical piano lessons at school.
Okay.
So when I was sort of like, 15, I started having piano lessons. And then I'd try, people would come around my house and I'd play piano with them in other contexts as well, things like this. And I even renovated a harmonium back then to
that's beautiful.
To work on stuff like this. But then I went to university to study physics, and it was just very hard to get to play with people if you played the piano. At the least you had to buy an electric piano and carry it around everywhere.
Exactly.
Actually, I did. But I wanted to play in more situations, and I'd developed an interest in jazz by then, listening as a listener. And I was also sort of aware that you could get somewhere on the saxophone reasonably quickly. The very basics. It wasn't like picking up a violin. So it was a good choice, because I could then I joined various bands, in my early 20s. I play in the university wind band, this kind of thing. Learn to play by doing it.
Interesting. Well, what about jazz? What kind of jazz were you into back then?
It actually came mostly from the UK side. I mean, as a teenager, I'd go out to concerts, and this might be things like, going to hear the Groundhogs at the Marquee Club or whatever, the tail end of the British blues scene and stuff. But then you start encountering aspects of the British jazz scene. So I'd go to Stan Tracy concerts and John Sermon, and so I got to hear, if you like, UK jazz, British jazz, before I'd really heard American jazz. And then I can remember when I was about 17, a friend of mine's father got us into Ronnie Scott's, where we heard Sonny Rollins.
Okay.
Playing with, what was the guy's name? Rufus Hartley, I think he was a bagpipe player. And I didn't really know much about jazz, and I thought it was probably normal to have bagpipes in a jazz group. So maybe that was at the beginning of something. I once did an improvised group, which was me, a Japanese guy who did throat singing, amplified electric bassoon, and bagpipes.
Man, wow.
So, that's sort of, that's the traditional jazz group style.
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway, so obviously back in those days, you almost discovered things by accident because you had to go out and find things.
Yeah.
The pre-online world, it was different. So you're stumbling all over the place, discovering a bit of this and a bit of that. There's no clear path into any particular direction.
Yeah, I know. It's like when I talk to your generation, it's even I bought CDs still. So when I speak to younger generation, it's like for them it's almost sounds like 3,000 years before or something.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah, and now you click whatever Sonny Rollins, and you got like 67 albums. And before, I guess you went to a record store and you had some money and like, okay, I'll buy this LP or later CD, or so it's
and you'd go to libraries to discover things.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah,
record libraries and like you take well, maybe that doesn't happen anymore. You used to take books out from libraries. You could take records out as well.
Yeah. Where did this interest for you to start it to? When I listen to your music and your sound, you created quite a unique sound and playing within the realm of jazz, let's put it, or improvised music, whatever we call it. But how did this story happen of you starting to explore this improvised world, I'll put it like that, or free jazz, if you want to call it like that? When does that begin with you?
I guess in the late 70s. And I think that was led partly by my listening, in the sense that there's a lot of music I was hearing which involved aspects of sound which were very different from what you would hear in jazz, such as the electronic music. And by electronic music at that time, I mean things like Xenakis and Stockhausen and a whole new sound world of music concrete, ways of operating with music, which in terms of the qualities of the sound and also the effect of the music, I was very into that. But I maybe this is looking back at it a bit, but I think I probably wasn't aware of it at the time, but I did want to be a player. I did want to play with other musicians.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be a traditional composer in the sense of making a piece and sending it out into the world. I wanted my life to be involved with making music with other people. And what we now call or I would probably call free improvisation, just came about through trying to explore how to bring these extra influences into the situations where I was playing with people.
Yeah.
I mean, early on, I was playing with the pianist Chris Byrne, who he was in the music department at the university where I was studying physics. And we began playing together in more conventional jazz settings. And then used to do sort of private work together, to play together without having any jazz framework to it.
Yeah.
But at that time, that meant he'd work almost entirely on the inside of the piano. This is around about 1975, so that wasn't such a common thing then.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And he was, to my mind, he was a pioneer of that direction in terms of the improvised music world. Anyway, I mean, clearly, somebody like Howard Riley had done, and Keith Tippett a little bit, both worked like that. But Chris really began exploring that in depth. So if you work with somebody behaving like that on an instrument, you have to find not only, if you like, new sonic qualities to your own playing, but you have to find new ways of interacting.
Yeah.
If you like, the tried and tested relationships between instruments that you get in jazz and in free jazz are of no use. So you start looking for new ones. So you discover things by doing it. I mean, that is the thing.
How did it go with you? I mean, did it help you actually that you didn't study music, that you were self-taught? Because that kind of freed you up, I guess. I mean, for me as well.
I think it did.
Okay.
There's two sides to that. I mean, early on, I used to get frustrated with certain things that I found problematic technically on the instrument things, because I'd, if you like, started off without any clear tuition. But after a while, I recognised this as actually a positive. I wasn't too hung up on, having the perfect embouchure.
Yeah.
Sorry. And it works. There's many things that link together. I mean, if you're playing with somebody back then, and still today, to some extent, I try to forget that I'm playing a saxophone and just think, what sound would I like to make at this point in the music? And you'll make an attempt at that. If you're actually playing a concert and the attempt seems to be going unsuccessfully, you'll change direction, okay, but you make some sort of attempt. And at the very least, that means you remember that, and the next time you play, you've got a little bit more to work on.
Yeah.
Or when I was younger, I used to remember it and then work on it at home, try and develop it more. So a little quality that you discover in a concert, you can bring home and try and expand it. And like anything, once you've expanded that one, it leads you somewhere else.
Yeah.
And you kind of go from A to B to C to D, and it's pretty hard to go from A to D. You've got to go through the processes to get there.
Yeah. Was there a certain factor of fear with you in the beginning? Like, or even now when you...
Fear?
Like, in improvising, that there's a wrong or right decision, I'll put it like that. It's a tough one in a sense, but you know what I mean? It's like...
Yeah, I think that, there are definitely wrong decisions. And you sometimes, you don't know till you've made them, really.
Exactly. How do you deal with that situation, actually? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, even after all these years, I sometimes think, after a concert, I think to myself, if I'd known I was going to play that, I'd have done it better.
Exactly. Yeah, that's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Yeah.
And you have to deal with it. And in a way, that ultimately is a positive, because that's what gives it life.
That's the beauty of it, yeah.
Gives it energy. stops it being just a presentation of something accomplished and smooth. You know, it's the working out of something.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's it's just like, for me, it's always it's either you're in the moment or in the zone or whatever, or sometimes I'm not, and then I start, if you start to question yourself. I mean, sometimes I do that, like when I improvise, and then I know it's something is not good because, I'm not listening, or it's a tough
I
one.
think most improvisers you talk to will say they do things that make them go, I wish I hadn't done that. But you accept that as part of it, and of course, there's nothing particularly objective about that. I mean, I found this, especially listening to material that's in a group, and the group wants to release a record, and there's the part of it where I go, on a personal level, I don't like that. I don't like my own playing there, but people have said, Ed, it sounds great there, but they're seeing it from such a different perspective.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
What I thought, and often what it is it isn't some objective rightness or wrongness. It's more that you had an intention to do something, and that intention didn't quite work for you yourself, but it may actually have been successful in the music.
Yeah.
In the bigger picture.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a funny thing because we're improvising with other people, so in a sense we're concerned with ourselves, yet we're also interacting.
Yeah.
So that's quite a tough one, actually. It's not so easy. I mean,
and a little area that goes a little unstuck can be just the right catalyst for something beautiful to happen.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah.
Again, it's a mistake, I think, when you're up to a point when you're releasing records to only try and release the best bits.
Yeah, definitely.
Whatever that means.
Yeah.
Because you need to hear something of the process of getting there for it to be a best bit. It's not a best bit if you take it out of the context.
Yeah. I agree.
I mean, we're all trying to create the best music we can, but you can try too hard and it ruins the music. You've got to.
Definitely. Yeah, or playing too much or too little, or when to come in. Sometimes students ask me that, like, how should I know what to do, or when do I know when to come in? If there's a duo improvising, and I don't know, listen, it's a hard choice, but you have to stand behind it, and with conviction, I guess, or yeah, it's
sometimes you need to come in. Well, yeah. For anything you say, you can almost say the opposite, but sometimes you need to come in and almost not do anything to allow something to happen. And sometimes you need to come in with something quite distinctive and personal, and it's an obvious statement.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a mumble and it's nothing really, and that could be as useful.
Yeah, it leads to somewhere, like you said, an event. But you said, you started to play improvised music in order to play with other people, to improvise with them. Yet you've done so much, I think, solo work. And when did you start doing that? Was that already in the 80s, like starting to explore solo saxophone? I mean, especially, I know later you did this resonance spaces and lots of solo playing, which in non-traditional, whatever, how I want to put it, but like in different ways, different venues, which I found it interesting because you studied physics. So I don't know whether this is connected with this. Also, you exploring the sound and something in. But what's the story with you and the solo saxophone playing?
Yeah, that started in the 80s, and I think it was that I'd be on a concert, which was probably with a group, and we decide to maybe have 3 solos, 5-minute solos as part of the program of the music. And it's probably common to everybody that the first few times you do it, it's that is when you feel some fear, and it's a scary process. But obviously, when you play solo, in some ways you're the closest you get to being a composer, in the sense that you are responsible for everything.
Yeah, real-time composing, kind of. Yeah,
the ideas.
Yeah,
you're not having any. Well, we'll come to resonance spaces in a minute, but generally speaking, you're not having much external input to suggest things to you. You don't have any other musicians' input, so it has to come from yourself. So you start thinking differently, and that way of thinking about your own music, I mean, I realised it's not only important if you want to operate solo, but it feeds in a very interesting way back into playing with people.
Yeah, definitely.
So, although I think aesthetically and in terms of how and the psychology of it, they're very different situations. They're very mutually sympathetic. They both inform each other. And after a while, you kind of get the bug, it's
it's a thing.
It's another thing, what can I discover? Early on, I tended to sort of map out in my head a little, some thoughts
like a story
about it before. But I found that very often you'd be playing and something about the reality of that moment would suggest a better idea to you than your plan. So what do? And I decided, okay, you go with the new idea. And after a while, that led me to really not plan a solo. And I found that a much healthier way to improvising as a soloist. Although, of course, when you say not plan, you can never really do that because you've got the memory of all your previous solo.
Exactly.
Concerts.
Yeah.
So, even if it's just at a subconscious level, there's this kind of, well of ideas that you can draw from. So in a way, it's really only the first few times you do it that you do a genuine free improvisation as a soloist, and thereafter,
that's an interesting way, to think about it. Actually,
you're developing I think you're developing a music which you can think of it as a music that's sort of in some way always going on inside you, and then you just come into the stream. You step into the stream and you step out of the stream for a concert.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
That's how it comes.
Yeah.
But it's to me, it's not really as I reached a point where it wasn't as enjoyable as playing with other people. So when I got asked to play solo again, I had fortunately it was a period where I was invited to play in some of these non-concert spaces, and that sort of opened up a new chapter in a way, because then okay, you're working with very unusual acoustics, so that forces you to play in a different way.
Yeah, man,
you can't just take your usual music into it. You've got to make it work there. So that became pretty important for me, actually, to have to try and, create, a site. I don't like that term, actually. No, I was going to say site specific, but you could just create something for the particular situation.
Yeah,
how it sounds.
Yeah, you play long note, of course. You can play one long note and that's it, or whatever. Yeah,
and it becomes.
It's beautiful.
You don't want to. I mean, you mentioned physics. What I don't want to be is somebody who demonstrates the acoustics of a space.
Okay, yeah.
That's a danger. You actually want to bring your music in there, but you have to treat the space as your musical partner in the same way you would as if you were playing a duet with somebody.
Yeah.
And so acoustically, it's fascinating, but also the atmosphere in these kind of places is very different from a concert hall.
Oh man.
And the kind of audience you get is very different. So those are very stimulating factors. I mean, on that resonant spaces thing, we're playing on some of the islands off the north coast of Scotland. The
Orkneys and all those, right?
Yeah. So the audience that comes are local people.
Wow.
Who don't know, who mostly, or probably nobody really knows the context from which my music comes. They wouldn't call it improvisation. They wouldn't call it new music. They wouldn't call it experimental music. I don't know. It hasn't got a term. But because you're doing it in an unusual space, people are more open to something a little less usual happening. I mean, on the Isle of Hoy, there are these giant oil tanks which were used for refueling ships.
Oh wow!
And one of them had been turned into a war museum, and it's like a giant baked bean tin, 200 meters across and circular. So the acoustics is extraordinary in there. And there's an odd atmosphere because it's a war museum, so you've got weapons in there and all the paraphernalia of war.
Yeah,
that creates an oddity, the atmosphere. But as soon as somebody walks in that room, the first thing they do is clap their hands just because it goes kapow. So it doesn't seem so surprising that there's some sort of weird saxophonist standing over in the corner making these sounds, because it's sort of what you might expect to be happening in there.
Yeah.
The audience can get into it that way. But if they came to, if they sat down in plush seats at a concert hall, they'd probably, start fidgeting and soon be out the door.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Yeah. Are you still exploring this? This area of going into this?
When I get the chance, so I mean, this year I got invited to. I played in it once. It's a water tower in the suburbs of Copenhagen.
Oh wow, man! Okay.
And concrete. It's a concrete building, and extremely tall and extremely resonant and extremely cold. But that's another factor of playing these places. There's a certain physical discomfort often, which has an effect. But this time I got invited to go over and make a recording, which will come out at some stage.
Oh, good.
And I found it quite difficult because playing solo is very hard without an audience. Just doing it to a microphone. So that was an occasion where I did kind of map out some ideas in my head.
Yeah.
Beforehand, because you can't rely on if you're in front of an audience, there has to be a continuity. You can't really stop and start again, and there's an urge that keeps the music.
Yeah, like a responsibility
moving.
Almost.
Yeah. So you need a different approach. I think if it's just you and a microphone and an engineer.
Yeah, that's quite heavy then, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. On the other hand, I wanted to ask you about your big group work. The Huddersfield Music Festival always pushed you to check out these boundaries of the large group, and it's quite a big tradition within the UK improvised scene. I'll put it like that. Going back to John Stevens and Kenny Wheeler and all these Evan Parkin players. Like, how do you then envision a larger group when you set up a concert? Like, how does that go with you? And also about the players, how do you decide about the players who are going to be in the group? I mean, they're all incredible improvisers.
The I mean, it's not something I do that often, but
Yeah.
and the opportunities that have come from the Huddersfield Festival, because their interest is in elements that, I won't use the word combine, but elements that can contain somehow composition and improvisation.
Yep.
And they've invited me to make a few pieces over the years. And the last one, as you say, was this 14-piece group put together. And I'm not a natural composer for other people.
Okay. How come? In what sense?
Because I think there's two sides to it. I mean, this is almost a paradox in a way, I think, of improvisers. The improvisers generally are people with quite strong opinions about music making and how they would like it to sound, but they decide to work collaboratively towards it.
Yeah.
So becoming a composer traditionally means introducing certain hierarchies into the processes of music making, which I'm not interested in. And I think I come from that school of thought in improvisation, that one of its particular values is that it challenges those hierarchies.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the great things that the first generation of free improvisers did. They showed that musicians could take control of their own music and, in a sense, be composers, but of their own music made collaboratively with other people.
Yeah, sure.
You know, so there's a lot of the idea of composing comes with a lot of baggage, most of which I reject.
Okay.
So nearly always I'd like to call it organizing music, perhaps. I organize music for musicians that I know.
Yeah, that makes it easy.
In the sense that at least I know, hopefully that I know personally, but at the very least I know their music quite well.
Yeah.
And then you invite certain people because you know they'll have some sympathy to working in a situation where there are directions. I mean, I think that's quite important. And then I get involved in what I think of as a kind of psychological orchestration. I use my knowledge of their music and their histories and to some extent personalities in deciding how to lay the music out.
Yeah.
Trying to imagine, okay, that if I give Mark this instruction, he will probably do something like this. I'll imagine in my head. And I would like to combine that with Isabelle Dutoit operating in this manner, and I'll suggest that. And
yeah.
So I'm not thinking of a percussionist and a voice. I'm thinking of those people. And in the piece in Huddersfield, I had a combination of specific instructions, musical instructions of what to do, graphic instructions which are open to more interpretations, specific combinations of people, specific ways of interacting, sort of trying to mix in all the time the possibilities of them bringing their own music into the piece, but the ideas that I'm giving them create some sort of coherent overstructure of the piece.
Yeah.
And a few extras. I mean, I want it to be something that wouldn't just happen if they came together to improvise. I mean, that's important in these situations.
Yeah.
So for this one, we had Dieter Kovacic known as Deep Dreitzehn,
Yeah.
the turntablist, and I recorded some saxophone pieces based on mostly the very small sounds of the saxophone and some feedback sounds. And then I got him to cut them to vinyl. And then he used those vinyl discs in improvisations with certain of the musicians.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
So in a way, that's a way of giving a sound quality to the music without specifically saying you must play this and you must play that.
Yeah.
So those kind of ways of thinking form the shape of the piece, if you like, give it its qualities that reach an area which you wouldn't get to with free improvisation.
Yeah.
And I find it almost impossible to write for people I don't know. I mean, I did it for a saxophone quartet, who are a conventional saxophone quartet, and in that I actually wrote it conventionally, so it's all completely notated. Because I didn't know them. I was invited to do this, and I thought I'll try it out of interest and write that. But I mean, that's not really the musical direction I'm particularly interested in. Although I do really enjoy it, like Tarab Cuts.
Yeah, I found it a very interesting one.
That clearly has a structure, and I've built it up around these. I mean, I'll just mention what it was about. It came from an invitation to make a piece based on a collection of historic Arabic recordings of traditional music and Sufi music, which was held in an archive in the Lebanon. And I made it. It was a short piece, and I made it as a solo piece where I constructed a playback tape, although of course we don't use tape these days, but whatever. Where I was cutting from hundreds of little edits from these records to sort of create a new configuration of the Arabic music, which I then improvised with, and then got an offer from Huddersfield to make an hour-long piece with it, and I invited Mark into it and extended the process. That sort of composing I like, where clearly it's not a free improvisation; it's a piece based on these recordings, and it's got structure, and it's got sections where certain things happen, and it's got tunes.
No, I like that. It's a good one. Yeah, I mean, it's like always the sense of composing, or the Ellington way, like composing for the players, or even, like you said, organizing music for the players. I think that's way better. I mean, because how that guy sounds like, and it's just like that helps so much the music. I mean, it's way more personal also, and involved, I guess that's the word.
Yes, yeah. So what you want to do is you don't want to, as it were, which I mean, people from the straighter composed music world often do this. I think they get improvisers into their compositions, and they basically steal that improviser's music, call it their own. Not to put too fine a point on it.
No, but yeah.
And obviously, I'd never want to do that. You don't want to get the feel that you're just hiring a bunch of performing monkeys to do their stuff under some director's guidance. It has to be a very mutual, symbiotic kind of relationship between the composer and the performers that creates the music.
Yeah. I think especially in the improvised world, this is more happening than in the straight ahead, let's put it, world. You call, there were these cases, or still are, in the straight ahead jazz world, where people called Dave Holland and Jack DeJohnette had paid them whatever, and those guys just played those tunes, and it I mean, sounds okay, but it's nothing special even with those guys. And with the improvised music, I think it's more this personal level of connecting with people, and at least the sense that I got throughout the years, and which is great. I think that's how better music, I'll put it like that, is created.
I think you're right. Yeah, yeah.
So, but speaking of connections, I wanted to ask you also about, you mentioned Derek Bailey, and you played with this older generation, the new Derek Bailey, Phil Minton also a lot. And what was your experience, especially with Derek? I mean, I'm a guitarist, so and how did that happen for you? Since you said like there was this kind of non-intent from your side not to play it so with these people, but still, how was it with Derek with you?
I think Derek he kept his eye and ear a little bit on what was happening in London, and you would see him. He'd turn up at people's concerts occasionally.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay.
And I'm just trying to remember the kind of sequence of it. I think he'd been and heard a group that was called, it was with my colleague Chris Byrne again, Chris Byrne's Ensemble, which was an 8-piece group. This was being the, I don't know, mid to late 80s, I suppose. And actually, I mean, it ties in a little bit of what we were talking about in terms of composing. This was the intention of that group was to try and, it had been going since the early 80s, it had been to try and have a group improvisation which was effectively a kind of chamber improvisation. It wasn't along the lines of the more free jazz large groups, kind of models of Globe Unity or London Jazz Composers Orchestra, these sort of things. So we used to write scores for that, and that they really were mostly scores based around who plays when, with some directions of the musical material. But it's a way of creating space in an improvisation, creating new ways of listening in a large group improvisation. And there weren't. This was not a common area back then. I think there's the King Ubu Orchestra were operating in a similar way in Germany at the time, with people like Gunter Christmann and
okay, yeah.
And interestingly, I've gone off the topic of Derek Bailey a little bit here, but after a while, we found we almost didn't need the scores because they taught us how to play together in a certain way.
Yeah.
Anyway, Derek, of course, in a sense, had a very strong belief in free improvisation, but he seemed to be a little bit interested in this idea. And he came to one of our concerts, and then he invited the group to play on a festival he was putting together of different groups. He was playing in some things on it anyway. So I think that's how our paths first crossed. And I might be wrong here, but then I seem to remember sometime after that, he invited me and Mark Sanders to go around to his house to play.
Okay.
Which we did. And nothing really came of that. And maybe, I don't know, a year later, he asked me to play a duo concert with him. So,
oh, wow.
89, something like that. So
already, okay, well,
so that began. But he was very interested in playing with new musicians. You know, in the later years of his life, he went to live in Barcelona, and he'd set up concerts in a local restaurant or bar, playing with local Barcelona musicians, and he enjoyed that. His philosophy was not to play in fixed groups, to seek out new playing parts.
possibilities. Yeah, and
So I
everything,
was, and by that stage in my own playing, I was very, very happy to play with him, and very, grateful to have the opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Musically, it was. I did notice, as I said, I'd been playing more with my own contemporaries, and I did notice a difference. In a way, there was something a little bit more combative about it.
Which makes sense, that entire generation with Peter Bertzman also, and
Yeah,
I know what you mean. Yeah.
I'm not meaning that at all negatively. I'm just meaning that in the sense of somebody comes in with strong ideas and plays them.
Yeah.
And you work with that within that world.
Yeah.
And then once it starts happening, the music progresses. I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience. I mean, you get to know the sense of somebody's music by playing with them, and you can discover that sort of within 5 minutes.
Sure.
Of listening, and you may hear somebody you feel that, okay, I could really work with this person, or you may think, okay, this is probably going to be the only time.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
And it was, I'd always been an admirer of Derek's playing and really enjoy his music. And it's through playing with him that I really learned how flexible he was with it. Because, again, that's almost another paradox. When somebody's developed such a very particular and individual style,
yeah,
the real test that it's of value is if it's really flexible, and he was in an improvising situation.
Yeah.
He really made his material move with you. Great ears, So
Yeah.
Some people can do amazing things on an instrument and still can't really improvise with somebody else. They've developed a solo thing.
Yeah.
But Derek was an example of somebody who'd really
Who could do all of that,
the instrument, challenged a lot of preconceptions, and produced something which was a new language that could speak with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. He's so important for guitar. I mean, especially in the improvised context, for I think especially how you can really tear apart the preconceptions we have about the instrument. I think that's
I mean,
important.
A lot of my music, called early musical development, was sort of done independently with friends, and knowing a bit about things and not knowing about things. But if there's only one person on the UK scene who really had who I'd say had a significant, I was aware of a significant influence right from early on, it was Derek Bailey.
Yeah.
I must have, heard him 100 times in concert, and that's an exaggeration. Let's have a think.
I don't know what you mean.
Yeah. I mean, because he was playing in London a lot, probably 50 times. I don't know. And it wasn't just his own playing. It was, if you like, it was his attitude to how to live as a musician, in terms of making music with other people.
Yeah.
All the company weeks that he put together, which were fascinating events, really showed you something valuable about music, because the concept of company was invite a bunch of players together, hopefully for a week. Maybe it'll mean 5 concerts, put them in different combinations, try and get the audience to go every night to hear both, to hear the music, but also hear how people changes, as they get to know each other's music, playing different combinations. And that was very valuable. I've heard some of the greatest music and some of the worst music in that.
Oh, sure, man. Of course, yeah.
In company weeks.
Sure.
But that then gives you a different perspective on what going to a concert means. It doesn't mean you're going to be wowed in any obvious way.
Yeah. But he seemed to be, not afraid of trying things, which is good. Like you said, it could be the worst or really the best. It's walking on the edge, which I think that's so important if you want to create something really good. But it can fail. You can fall, of course.
Oh yeah.
So very interesting. Well, you've played with, I think, everyone on the UK improvised scene and the European so much. You didn't so much connect with the American improvisers, except with Gerry Hemingway's record, that one, I think, Songs, which I found it interesting that you came into that lineup. I wanted to ask you about that. How did that happen? I didn't, but how come you never, or maybe you did, or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I have. I mean, the Songs thing is interesting because I was actually on tour with Gerry in America.
Oh.
And we were staying at somebody's apartment, and we were doing a duo tour.
Really?
And we've got a couple of duo records out, improvised records.
Oh, shit, I have to check them out. I don't have them. I have just Songs. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And he said, we just both had a sleep in the afternoon before the concert, and I woke up and he said, "Have you got time to play on this track?" So he had a tape recorder there and gave me some headphones, and he played a tape of that song, and I just played along with it, and that was it. That was my contribution to the record. That was all it was.
Well, but how did you hook up with Gerry, actually?
So good question. I think we actually met at a few festivals, particularly Vancouver in Canada, which was for a while in terms of our music was a great festival. There was a marvelous promoter called Ken Pickering.
Ken Pickering, yeah, sure.
Yeah, who used to invite a lot of Europeans over, and it was a major jazz festival, but he'd find a place for us within it, and it's great. Anyway, so I'd meet Gerry there just to talk to and chat to. I remember actually what the first meeting was. Georg Graver's Grubenklang Orchestra. Georg Graver, you may know him.
Oh, sure, I know him. Yeah, a couple of records. Yeah.
He had a large group, which I joined for a while in the 90s, and that was actually in Vancouver. We first played, and Gerry was in that, so that would have been how we met.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm remembering it now. Then it was some years before we started playing together in smaller groups. And that still happens off and on, although last occasion was 2019, and we did a trio with Thomas Lehn.
Oh, wow, really? Oh,
player.
I don't know. Okay.
France.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So I played with a lot of Americans in America, and then had a ongoing relationship with Gino Robert, a percussionist from California. We've done a lot of records actually together, and there was a couple of records with Matthew Shipp.
Really? Oh shit! Yeah. I have to find them. Okay. Wow. Okay. Wow. I didn't know that. Really? No, wow. Super. Okay.
So
really looking forward to hear that actually. Okay.
Yeah, I used to go to America a lot more. So Fred Longberg Holm, Michael Zarang.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think you did an interview with Joe Morris, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I played with Joe a few times.
Really? Oh wow, man.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
interesting. Yeah. No.
That's another side.
Yeah. I didn't know that. I have to investigate it. I've always seen you like as a real strong mainstay of, you know, the British and the European improvised scene in the last 40 years, I guess. But you know, I just know this connection with Gerry, and so that's why I wanted to ask you. So, if and how you did it. So, but okay, obviously did. So I have to dig into that. So that's cool. Yeah,
it's my secret life.
Yeah, exactly. Your standards quartet in New York somewhere.
Of course, I do it under another name. So
yeah, of course.
That's probably why you've missed it.
Of course, yeah. No, but John, what are your plans otherwise for the upcoming year? You know, touring wise or project wise, or
yeah. There's plans. I've got to say, the whole situation post pandemic is still quite different than it was before for musical life. So it's curious. Some musical connections seem to have, you know, seem to be resting, shall we say? And another new one seem to be coming about. What have I got coming up? There seems to be quite a lot of recorded activity. I mean, I was fortunate this year. I was invited to release a series of 5 LPs on a label called Ni Vu Ni Connu, and they came out this year, and he wants to continue with that. So there's 2 more coming out. These will actually be, the previous ones were all recorded in Berlin, and it's based more around German musicians, and the 2 new ones was recorded here, UK musicians. Mark Sanders will be involved, John Edwards.
Oh wow, fantastic.
And Harrod Davis, who's a violinist, and Pat Thomas.
Oh wow, okay, cool.
Oh, Pat.
Yeah, I know Pat, yeah.
So that's coming out. There's a trio with Chris Corsano.
Oh really? Oh man,
and
fantastic.
Florian Stoffner, who's a great guitarist from Zurich.
Oh, fantastic.
And on the guitar side, do you know Andy Moore from the X?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. A trio with him and Thomas Lehn called Thermal.
Oh.
Which it's actually, we put a record out 20 years ago. So this is our second one. That's not bad. That's pretty good, I think. More bands should wait 20 years. I think,
exactly. Exactly.
And both of those groups have tours coming up. Thermal, the group with Andy Moore, and the trio with Chris, have both got tours coming up.
Fantastic.
And then, I mean, by choice, my musical life is, if you like, playing in ever-changing combinations. There's probably, 50 people around the world that I like playing with, and you try and make opportunities to make projects with them. So, and hopefully every few years you get to play with all of them,
Yeah. Oh, beautiful.
So there's more activities like that.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Yeah, shit. So much to check out. Okay. I'm looking forward to it. So it's good. You're active. Beautiful, man. Yeah. Cool. John,
okay, good.
I'll let you be now. So
yeah. Well, let's spend another couple of minutes just